The film, I'm sure, as most people know or can surmise from the title, the Tillman story, is about Pat Tillman, who, of course, gave up his football career in the NFL to be a soldier. But there's so much more to it than that. I think people are aware of the Friendly Fire story. But tell us about the complexities that your film portrays, Amir.
Well, the reason we call it the Tillman story is because in some ways the film is more about the story that developed around Pat Tillman than about Pat Tillman himself. And just looking into this tale, from the get-go, we realized that there was tons of misinformation and kind of, I call it Paul Bunyanization out there about Pat Tillman. And that, I know that what I knew and what I think most people know about Pat Tillman was really just the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, was kind of a cartoon version of who he really was and of what his family has gone through.
Well, let's start about take it back a step. How did you get involved in this project? What brought you to it?
What brought me to it was just the bare facts. This story that seemed resonant with Jessica Lynch and some of the other things that had happened in that particular period of time, where we had been kind of sold these, really Hollywood forms, to easily digestible kind of cookie cutter Hollywood forms. So that's something that's very interesting to me, the way we kind of narrativize reality. But I had no idea that it was so deep with Pat Tillman. And I think it's really easy to kind of, blame the government, blame the military for the lies about Pat Tillman. But if you take a deeper look, you realize that, we got the Pat Tillman that we wanted. And the news and the media is to blame, but also the culture at large. I think it's not a film about the 8 years of the Bush administration. It's a film about our culture and, things that are around to this moment.
And it's also very centered around the Tillman family, specifically Pat's mother, Danny. Talk for a second about it, because watching the movie, I went into this movie expecting it to be, it is emotional. I don't want to say that it's not, but it has a rationality to it. And I think that comes from his family. They seem very logical, very driven, very smart.
And restrained. I would add restrained. And it elevated our film to the next level, because they weren't going to kind of give us the cheap shot documentary porn, I remember the moment I found out kind of moments, because they're an incredibly private family with a really healthy sense of, of integrity and of kind of, their own, the fact that they don't need to kind of go out there and telegraph their love for their missing son or this tragedy. The real reason they did this was to kind of prevent this from happening again, not to kind of trumpet their own story out there. So it forced us to, I think, to tell this story without kind of maudlin, cliches. And they never. I remember talking to his brother and asking him about finding out when Pat was killed, and he just said, I'm not gonna do that now. I'll tell you later. It's so refreshing, because I think in this day and age we have just this sort of instinctual sense that everything is everybody's business, and the Tillmans are a wake-up call in that way.
They seem very private, but let's take it from the point where Pat Tillman died tragically, and the news was given to his family, which they believed at first, and then his mother later launched an investigation.
Well, the family was told, actually I should say the entire country was told something just pulled, a page from a Hollywood script, just basically a John Wayne movie. And but the government realized pretty quickly that it was very hubristic for them to try and pull off this idea that Pat had died single-handedly saving the life of his platoon, yelling, "Let's take the fight to the enemy," as he charged into a hail of Taliban gunfire, which is what they initially tried to disseminate. So they backpedaled. Not long after they told this John Wayne story, they began to backpedal. And what they basically said was, everything we told you about Pat's heroism and this Taliban story is still true, but we just happened to find out 5 weeks later that he was caught by an errant U.S. bullet in the fog of war. And that fog of war scenario, I think, actually is what most people still think of when they hear the story that Pat was killed by friendly fire. They kind of imagine in their mind, born on the 4th of July or something like that. Well, his mom and his family began to ask questions, and quickly they learned that, there were inconsistencies and that the story didn't add up. And they pushed back on the military, and then the military did something else very arrogant. They handed over to the family a box of documents that was heavily redacted. In fact, some of these pages are just black lines. It was 3,500 pages related to Pat's death, and they put it in a box and they sent it off to the family, basically thinking that'll shut them up. And they underestimated Danny Tillman, Pat's mom. And in this little cottage in the Santa Cruz Mountains, often spending nights awake, all night awake, she single-handedly, sorry, I shouldn't say single-handedly, she unredacted these documents. She spoke with ballistics experts and fellow soldiers of Pat's, and she enlisted a very interesting veteran who had been in Pat's platoon, but years earlier, a guy who had been in Somalia and Haiti and Vietnam, a real bona fide black ops soldier who helped them to try and figure out what had actually happened.
And eventually it went all the way up to Capitol Hill towards the end of the film. You have, the real footage from that actual hearing with all the, the Secretary of Defense and everyone else at a very high level who was involved in this decision. What was it like for you working with the Tillman family? Because you mentioned that they're very private, but during the course of this filmmaking process, did you in any way were you able to become part of their inner circle, I guess is what I'm trying to ask?
I can answer that by saying there's a scene in the film. It's a very quick shot, but I think it's kind of the key to understanding Pat Tillman and the Tillman story. It's when someone dies, when someone famous dies, Michael Jackson or whoever, or Pat Tillman, these little impromptu memorials get set up where people leave candles and little notes and things like that. Well, you see in the Tillman sidewalk memorial that was set up in Arizona, our camera sort of pushes into a T-shirt that somebody has left there that they've scrawled on. And the T-shirt has two words, "Our Hero." But instead of underlining hero, whoever wrote the T-shirt has underlined "our." So it says "Our Hero." And somehow with Pat Tillman, people seem incapable of just admiring him. They had to kind of own him. I'm sure this is a phenomenon that's not just, about Pat. It's something to do with the nature of heroism, the nature of the way we admire people, that everybody wanted a piece of Pat Tillman. And that kind of holds true for his family, too. It's funny, there are a lot of people who admire the Tillmans who, or who admire Pat Tillman, who pretend to be better friends of his, now that he's gone. And so, I hesitate to say, I'm down with the Tillmans because, I am a documentary filmmaker. We worked very closely with them. I admire them a tremendous amount. And, and I'm down with them. No. I hate to say it's so interesting. The Tillmans are so refreshingly genuine that people are, you find over and over again. I mean, we found in making this film, everybody has to, people are more careful about the way they talk about them than you would normally be. And I find myself, doing these interviews now, I find myself doing the same thing. I don't want to overstate how close we are, and I don't want to, overstate how great they are, and I don't want to speak for them either. They're very admirable people, but they're also just human beings. And part of what the story is about for me is the way that we put these people we admire up on this huge pedestal and turn them into these cartoon characters. It's a way of kind of letting ourselves off the hook. I could never do what Pat Tillman did because Pat Tillman was a superhero. Well, Pat Tillman did what a lot of people were talking about after 9/11, and any of us could have done it. Nearly any of us could have done it. So I think as much as the film celebrates the Tillmans and celebrates Pat, it also kind of just brings him back down to earth.
In the film, you kind of portray that from a lot of different sides. The Tillman family, but also Pat Tillman being this non-cartoon character, because you talk about his privacy, how he never really gave interviews as to why he joined the military, but also there's allusions to that he wasn't just on the bandwagon for any particular administration, that he had opposing points of view as well. I think you portrayed him very much in that way. I'm just curious if you've gotten a reaction from the Tillman family now that the movie is done, what their thoughts are.
Well, they came to Sundance with us when we premiered the film, and I think insofar as a film can portray, a lifetime and everything they've been through, I think they're very happy with it. If I will go ahead and renege on my commitment not to speak for them, but the thing about Pat's character that you mentioned, I think worth discussing a little bit. He was a complicated guy, and he. One of the tragedies of this story, in my mind, is that his complexity has been robbed from him. Actually, the things about Pat Tillman that are heroic have been taken out of the story. He's gone down in history so far as this square-jawed paragon of moral certitude, when the opposite was the case. He was a guy who was infamous among his inner circle for, arguing two sides of a point. He challenged himself to see things from different points of view. He was, somewhat agnostic, or maybe even an atheist, but he was an avid reader of religion and interested in religion. And as you mentioned, he had some conservative, some things we would call conservative, and some things that we would call liberal in his perspective. And I think it's a great tragedy to kind of. What the family has said, actually, from the beginning, is that we lost him twice. We lost him once to death, and we lost him a second time to this mythology that has come to accrete around him. And you can't just blame the government on that. That has to do, again, with our culture. But even in the way in his heroism on the day and the moments he died, they actually took what he actually did out of the story. He actually was heroic. He did save the life of someone. But that wouldn't fit with this cartoon that they were going to try and disseminate. So they had to pull that out and replace it with the Hollywood cookie-cutter story. But our experience in making the film was that, when you strip all this stuff away, you like Pat Tillman even more.
It's been great having you in studio. Thank you so much.
Nice talking to you. Thank you.
I want to urge everyone to go out and see the Tillman story.
Thanks.